Hello, this is the non-dual lectionary for the eighth Sunday after Pentecost, year A, and we're continuing on with Matthew. We've got another parable this week, and a little trickier, I think, to take a non-dual perspective on this one. By on its face, it seems to present like a very divisive, dualistic approach. So let's see what we can do, though. It is Matthew chapter 13 verses 24 through 30 and 36 through 43, the parable of weeds among the wheat. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field, but while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, An enemy has done this. The slave said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. So, especially that last part, right? This explanation that does not seem to present any interpretation other than good and evil, and the end of days. This is how things will be. And so let's first ignore that, and then come back to it at the end. So if we set that aside at first, I actually think like there's deep wisdom here again, right? Almost as always, and it's almost um, like a core non-dual teaching, even, right? Which is um, regardless of how it came out, there's there's good and bad here. There's weeds and wheat, whatever you want to call it, right? There's seeming opposites, seeming desirable and undesirable, like all of this. And the seemingly obvious response is someone comes and says, "Well, let's get rid of the bad part, right?" And the response is, "No, don't get rid of the bad part. You'd uproot the wheat along with them." And that might be, you know, correct in terms of farming at the time or not. I don't know. But the point being, if we kind of sink into an actual non-dual perspective here, like that makes perfect sense, right? In a couple different ways. The first is just, the seeming good. If you try to remove the seeming bad, you are going to remove the seeming good at the same time. There are, the distinction between good and bad, right, is an illusion in the ultimate sense. And that even as I hear myself saying that, I'm like, oh, that doesn't sit right. Um, unless you just kind of have to feel into that one, like relax into that one, right? Which is, um, it's a construction that says this is good and this is bad, right? It's a concept that says this is good and this is bad, because ultimately there's just what ising, what is happening. I mean, happening is even like what is ising, right? Um, and so, again, there's this great stuff here, right? Um, this part at the end, let them grow into the harvest, and we'll collect the weeds first and bind them. Okay. There, we can take deep wisdom out of that too, right? Which is, yeah, ultimately preferences don't go away. Um, and, we can still return to do good work in the world, after having a deep recognition, right? There's something of the Bodhisattva vow there. Um, but no, I mean, it's like right on the face, like that's really deep wisdom of like, it's a pointer still. It's not like saying like there's no distinction here. But it's a pointer that leads in that direction, and it's really good stuff. The second way in which there's deep truth there, right, is also like the sense of like, hey, what makes you so confident you can even tell what's good and what's bad, what's the weeds and what's the wheat, right? It doesn't say that explicitly here, but that's something else we can feel into, right? Which is, I think we can just trace that in our own lives. Many times what we might think was bad, turns out to be, and it may be bad. I don't want to gloss over things. There's struggle, there's difficulty, there's suffering. But sometimes like something, as Jim Finley puts it, mysterious can happen and you can discover something because of that you may have not been able to discover otherwise. Um, so again, I mean, I think on its face, on the parable itself, pointing at some deep truths that like deeply resonate with um, a non-dual recognition or non-dual experience. I almost do want to use the word experience on this one, because I do think this is like something that you can discover and experience for yourself. And then we've got this explanation though, and it undoes like everything I just said in a way, right? Because it's like, oh no, 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 no. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and at the end of age, the angels will come, and they'll root out all causes of sin. Um, oof, that's a tricky one, right? Um, and we can sort of undo this, right? We can say, okay, this is an allegorical explanation that's tagged on later in historical settings, right? So maybe not what Jesus himself actually said or something like that. But it's here, it's in front of us. So what do we do with it, right? And if so first of all, I want to say two things about this too, right? The first is just like the core of everything is that what is, right? And it all belongs. It's all included. It's all, one thing that works for me is like it's all the outer reaches of the Big Bang right now, right? You can think of it like materialistically, the outer reach of the Big Bang is like the furthest extension of the universe, but another way is like the outer reach of the Big Bang in development is like what froths out of us right now. And so here we are, right, with this, and this is included too, right? This is something that froths out of that. And saying this is good and this is bad, and the reapers will come at the end. And um, that's deeply inside of all of us too, right? Um, both a desire that that will happen and like the efforts that we make it happen. Um, and like that we can say like, oh, but once you have this non-dual recognition, that all ends or something like that. But that's not quite, I don't feel like accurate because if it might end for the body mind that's like filtering it through in this moment, but for the universe, like this is still at work in the universe, right? And that leads to the second thing then, right? Is like, what is the universe doing with this, right? And how can we participate in it? And I mean, we participate in it like the first part I said too, just in that way. But the second is something like, yeah, I mean, like sitting with the difficult truth of something like this, right? Is something like, yeah, when we make these distinctions, this is the task that comes to us, right? When we say this is the good and this is the bad, and they'll be burned up at the end of age. The interesting thing about the difference between the parable itself and this is, the parable itself says, no, don't do that now because you would uproot the good if you did it now. This doesn't seem to say that, right? This doesn't say, um, this explanation doesn't say, well, you can't uproot it now because you would uproot the good with it. It just says, oh, it's going to happen at the end, right? That's when the uprooting will come. But then why wait to the end, right? And so the question is just like coming out of this. And if the question is coming out of us, what does it ask us of us, right? And to me, it asks of us, it sends us back to that first place again, right? Which is why wait to the end? Well, because there's something about seeming good and seeming evil, right and wrong, good and bad, existing in the same place that's important. I'll just, I can start kind of stop at important, but then we can, all the things I said earlier, right? About like, well, you may not, what is good and what is bad depends on perspective. It depends on growth. It shifts over time. Um, but also it shifts over time in development. It shifts over time in like how we view the world, or our own perspective and others' perspectives and all that. And but ultimately, then that whole thing is undone too, right? So the question just sits, this explanation is kind of like, okay, if you want an explanation, like here you go, but let anyone with ears listen. Like one of the things we can hear, right, is that you didn't explain the key part of the first parable there. And that key part was, just to say again, no, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the weed along with them. Well, why? What does that mean? And so I feel like we are sent all the way back, um, ultimately, if we listen to the whole story. And that's like kind of a cool thing in the end, even if, on its face, and let's be frank, like the vast majority of people that hear this then are not going to hear this as secret teaching. They're not going to hear it as something that leads them higher. It's gonna be a barrier to most people at most stages in their life towards, like a more expansive view, and also more expansive recognition, right? Like it doesn't point it seemingly that explanation to that recognition. But ultimately, if we have ears to hear, right? And I mean, I think whenever Jesus says, let those who have ears listen, or let those who can hear listen, he's saying like, hey, if you get it, if you have this non-dual recognition, hear the secret teaching, or see, read it, hear it from that perspective. I think that's always the key to what that means. And I think here, ultimately, it always just keeps pointing back to both, like, first of all, the parable itself just points us to like, this is what is, right? This is what is the description of what is at core. And so that's cool by itself. And then also, like, let those who can hear listen. Like, this explanation actually sends you back to this question because it doesn't answer everything. And that's kind of awesome.